Good morning, everyone. So my name is Donna Fawcett, and I have been homesteading since I was born. My parents were homesteading, my grandparents were homesteading, so I guess the definition of homesteading is probably closest by saying self-sustaining. So we grew all our own food. My mother made all of our clothes, so that gives you just a little bit of an information about me. So what is heritage poultry? Well, first of all, you need to understand what commercial poultry is. Back in the 90s, poultry was specifically selected, and I know Christy talked about the Cornish cross and Cornish hen Plymouth Rock cross becoming today's modern commercial meat bird. So I compare those to the royal families of the 1600s, where they didn't breed outside of their gene pool, and as a result, they ended up with a lot of medical issues and physical issues and psychological issues. Well, that's today's commercial meat birds. That's why they're as dumb as a post, like Christy said. So heritage poultry is defined as any poultry species prior to 1957 that is purebred. Heritage poultry has not been selectively bred in order to change traits. The birds can breed naturally without interference or assistance by the agricultural industry, and they maintain a consistent set of characteristics. Heritage poultry has not had genetics added or removed, either naturally through selective breeding or artificially through gene editing. And we're not going to touch on that because it's a real can of worms. So what is hybrid poultry then? Hybridization is simply the combining of two purebred breeds of heritage birds. And so, for example, you can take the Cornish cross. That is a hybrid. It's the Cornish hen and the Plymouth Rock. They become a specific set of genetics for a specific purpose. Initially, the hybrid is created so you want more meat or more eggs. And that, again, that's the commercial side of it. I have purebred heritage birds, but I also have hybridized birds that I've created myself. And I've done it for my own specific purposes. So then, what is a sex-linked chicken? And I know you saw in the pictures up there the black sex-link. So they take a hybrid chicken, so let's say a Cornish cross, and they breed it to another Cornish cross, which is also a hybrid. Their chicks, now I'm not sure this happens with Cornish cross, I'm just using that as an example. When their chicks hatch, the males will be one color and the females are another color. This is really handy. So if you want laying hens, you get a sex link that is, the female is that particular color. So in that picture she had, the black sex link, those chicks had black down when they were born. Their brothers had white down when they were born. So they could sell those chicks, those black chicks, as potential laying hens, and they could sell those yellow or white chicks as potential meat birds. So they didn't have to go through the whole sexing process, which is really interesting when they're this big. So if you really want to know how to sex chickens, talk to Christy. She's awesome at it. She had something that I'd never heard of. And I'm not going to say anything. I want her to. So there's a whole list of different kinds of sex-linked chickens. Where it ends is with those chicks. So if you tried to cross a black sex link with another black sex link, you're not necessarily going to get the chicks that are males are one color, females are another. So it's only in that one hybridization process. Now, I think, no, there isn't a list up there, but in the packet there's a list of sex-link. Is there? Yeah, ISA. ISA's a sex-link. Lomond Browns, red sex-link, black sex-link, red star, black star, golden comet. If you hear of any of those names, you know they're a sex-link bird. Does it make it any different for you when they're adults? No, it's no big deal. They're just basically a mutt. But where you want them is when you're specifically buying them as a chick. That's the only advantage. So there are also called autosex chickens. They're a very rare breed of couple of breeds of heritage chickens. And I went on the Rare Breed Heritage Chicken site just to check the prices. Some of them were $1,800 for 5 chickens. So I'm not going to be getting into that one. But the autosex means that they naturally produce male chicks that are one color and female chicks that are another. So every time they breed, they will do that. Every time their chicks breed, they will do that. It's an automatic thing. So, as I said, I have heritage poultry. Now I have Brahmas, and I asked Christy to, yes, that is my rooster. He is a handsome boy. He's very gentle. So, roosters normally are like pit bulls with feathers. And to answer the question, there is one way to kind of cure them from their aggression, for the most part. If I have an aggressive rooster and I want to keep him, I will pick him up in the morning when I start to do chores, tuck him under my arm, go and do the barn chores. He is so offended by the time I'm done my barn chores that he gets trained to see me and go the other way. So you can. Now the ones that it doesn't work on, they go in the soup pot. Okay, so then I have Jersey Giants. The Brahmas and the Jersey Giants are the two largest two largest chicken breeds of heritage breeds. They can be used for laying hens as well. I gather their eggs every day. They don't lay as many as the standard laying hens do, but they still lay them and they're still tasty. I also have French Canadian Bressa. So these are a much smaller bird, but they're the exotic meat that the French use for their cuisine. So when I got those, it was for 2 reasons. I wanted that meat to be bred into the size of my Jersey Giants and my Brahmas, and I wanted the white feathers. Now, white feathers, why? Well, when you pluck a chicken that has black feathers, it leaves a little dye in each pore, and it looks like that chicken has acne. So it's not very appetizing when you go to pull this out of the freezer, and this chicken's all covered with black dots. So that's why I want the white feathers. Then I have a sea bright. So that little beastie, she's about this big, but she lays eggs in profuse numbers, and she'll lay them through the darkest season. So January, February, she's laying eggs when nobody else is. So I'm still getting eggs from her. That's what I want to add as far as genetics into my flock. Then I have a lavender Orpington rooster. So this boy is quite literally blue-purple, very light colored, and he's almost as big as the Jersey Giant and the Brahma. I want him because of his blue feathers, because they pluck easy. So when I'm processing, I want a nice, clean carcass, but I want to be able to pluck it easily. Some of these heritage birds, when you start plucking them, you're pulling skin because the feathers are so well planted in there. But for some reason, that lavender Orpington coloring changes the pores, but they're easy to pluck. So I'm going to go on to the pros of heritage birds. They are hardy and they rarely get disease if you're properly raising them. So the second thing, they reproduce on their own depending on the individual hen. So you do get the odd hen in heritage poultry, and they just have no idea. They just don't really want to do the hatching thing. They'll sit on the nest for a week. It just starts to get going, and then they abandon it. They end up in the soup pot. But for the most part, you will have heritage hens. They will find their little nook or cranny where they think nobody's going to find them, and then all of a sudden they disappear, and you know they're sitting on a nest somewhere. And they will hatch them out, and they will raise them, and yes, they're fierce protectors. So I have one hen. I couldn't even tell you what her genetics are now because she's been in our flock for years. She's probably 7 years old, which is ancient for a chicken. She doesn't lay eggs anymore, but she is still desperate to be a mother. So every time this year, so February, she starts gathering eggs. And I will find a little clutch of eggs here and a little clutch of eggs there, because she's stealing eggs from the boxes and she's rolling them over to her little nest area. And when she thinks she has enough, she will plunk herself down there and growl at you if you try to move her to get the eggs. And it's quite literally a growl. So I left her one year and she hatched out a whole bunch of chicks, and I thought, okay, she's perfect. She's staying till she stops breathing. Well, this year, I decided, okay, I want some specific genetics and I want them early so that I can breed into them again in the summer. So I incubated some eggs. And going back to what Jaden said about the rooster, if you have a rooster and you want to breed through the winter months, you have to put a light on. The rooster goes sterile from about October to about February because he doesn't have enough sunlight. So anyway, I had a light on and I gathered the eggs and I incubated them, and they're about 3 weeks old now. I timed it poorly and I put them in the pen right beside her clutch of eggs. So at about 15, 16 days into her hatching, she abandoned the nest and went and sat in front of the door of the brooding pen and started talking to the chicks. So I knew the nest was no good, so I opened the door. Well, now every night when I go in to feed the birds, she will be sitting and she'll have all these 3-week-old chicks piled on top of her, and she's talking to them. So she has adopted them. The beauty of that is I was able to just introduce them right into the flock at 3 weeks old. I didn't have to have a separate heat lamp. And by the way, I hang mine about this high off the ground and cover the pen. So I don't really have the electrical issues and they can't break the bulb. But it is a real situation. I did have a bulb break a few years ago because the light was too low and they splashed water on it and it went poof. So it is something to remember. So these chicks are now in with the main flock, and this little hen that is a mutt, she will attack anything that comes anywhere near these chicks. So that's a heritage bird trait. When you've got a broody hen, she is broody till the day she dies. The third thing, they're not patented. So you can raise your flock without having to go and buy chicks. Some of the commercial mixes have been patented because of how they've been created. So that means you do not have the right. When you're dealing with heritage birds, there is no patent because they can be multiplied in the wild. And that's the difference. If it can be multiplied in the wild, you can raise them. If it can't, or breed them, if it can't multiply in the wild, they're patented. And you can't step into that. So number 4, they live longer, they lay eggs longer. I use my flock for both meat and eggs, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The cons, they're slow growing. So the commercial birds, how many weeks did you say? 6 to 8 weeks. A heritage bird takes 6 months. So, and that's usually the earliest. Now, they don't eat as much food. They don't require as much care. So it does offset, and in my mind, but they are a much slower growing bird. They don't end up with the joint problems. They don't end up with the heart attacks, but that's, so number 2, the meat is a bit tougher and denser, but it has a richer flavoring. So I tenderize the meat by pressure canning it on the bone. So all those old hens that have been laying for 5 years, and if you tried to roast them, you'd be eating rawhide. I partition them, put them in a jar, pressure can them, and then they go on the shelf, and that's bone and all, so I get the bone broth as well. They go on the shelf. When I'm ready to eat them, they come out of the jar, I dice the meat, I do a stir fry, and they're wonderful. And they have a far better flavor. So they don't go to waste. Now, if I want roasters out of the heritage breed, I will raise up the roosters till they're 6 months old, and then they are processed. And they are still a little tougher, but not much. So number 3, they're a bit tougher to pluck, and that's why I'm trying for the blue feathers. And I talked about that skin dye in the pores. Number 4, they're more aggressive. So the commercial flocks, typically, they've had that bred out of them. Because a farmer that's dealing with 1,000 poultry, he does not want to go into a pen full of young roosters and he wouldn't come out. So that's been bred out of them. The heritage breeds, I had a Plymouth Rock square off with a Rottweiler, and the Rottweiler backed down. So that tells you something. Are they all like that? No. As I said, my Brahma rooster, he's a sweetheart. He comes and greets me every morning, and he stands there patiently while I put the food in the dish. So it depends on the bird. But my rule of thumb is never turn your back on a rooster. They will attack when you turn around because they don't see your eyes. They figure you're fair game. Number 5 is the cost. I know the commercial birds are cheaper to buy as poults. So right now, on average, you're paying $6 to $10 a chick for heritage birds. The offset for that is you can reproduce them. So that's a one-time cost if you do things right. So then we go into heritage turkeys. I have the same philosophy with my turkeys as I do with my chickens. I am a fan of diverse genetics. So I have a Royal Palm Tom. Isn't he beautiful? I have a blue slate hen. I have a bourbon red hen. Now that's not my hens because that's actually Tom's, but I couldn't find a picture of her. And then I have 2 sweetgrass mixed breed hens. Now the sweetgrass, I don't have that up there. They look like the Royal Palm with a little bit more brown in them, and they're actually a Canadian breed. Yay, Canada. So I don't incubate the eggs for the turkeys. Because they're a heritage breed, they have a really strong nesting instinct. And right now, mine are breeding and preparing their nests. And I don't go in the pen and mess with them. because they're a lot bigger than chickens. I do keep their flight feathers clipped. So the pinions, I clip them. Turkeys are fully flighted birds. So they can actually lift off and go for quite a long ways. They will roost 30 feet up in a tree. That's a really disconcerting thing to see when you get up in the morning and you see turkeys roosting up in your spruce trees. And you don't want to walk underneath because they'll bless you. So I keep them on the ground. Now, there's people with two thoughts on that. I do it because we are the drop-off point for all the trapped raccoons and skunks and possums in the local community. They see our woods and say, we'll just rewild this beautiful little raccoon. So I don't need my turkeys up in a tree where the raccoons and possums are going to climb up in the middle of the night and take their head off. So they stay on the ground in a pen. They're in an outdoor pen that goes around our pond. There's lots of grass. They very rarely eat any poultry food in the summer. And in the winter, I feed them. So I have 5 breeding birds, and they would probably eat the equivalent that 5 chickens would eat. And that's in the winter. So if you're looking at costs for feed, turkeys per pound are a better bet. But turkeys are kind of like sheep. Sometimes they look for places to die regularly. So you do have to know they are a little more fragile than chickens are. They do have a shelter out there. They rarely use it. I'll look out in the middle of a snowstorm, and there they are perched on the rocks all fluffed out and right beside the shelter. They have no desire to go in the shelter. They are a Native American bird, so they're adapted to our weather anyway. So if I can't find a hen, I know she's either eating in the pen or she has built a nest. And it is brutal trying to find that nest. They are masters of camouflage. Even as fancy as they look, they will find an area that has similar coloring. So you're looking at the bourbon red. My bourbon red hen will nest where there are cedar branches because she's the same color as those cedar branches. That's pretty smart. The Canadian sweetgrass hens that have a lot of white in them, they'll go in where there's not wild mustard, it's the white, it's a weed that's got little white flowers. Yeah, and she'll go and hunker down in among the Queen Anne's lace, and she fits right in, and she's hard to see. They are really good ratters, by the way. When we had a rat problem in our old barn, our one turkey hen made a sport of laying them out along the wall after she killed them. Yeah, so they're tough when they need to be. I leave the chicks with the turkeys until the chicks are fully feathered, and then I will wait until nighttime when she's roosting so she doesn't beat me up, and I will one night after another snatch a chick. So she adapts to losing her chicks, which is something that happens in the wild. Coyotes, they'll go hunting for those turkey chicks, and they'll snatch one at a time. So it's not something that is uncommon for that hen, and she'll just assume that a predator has taken them. But she forgets all about that next year and still lays eggs and still hatches them. Sometimes I will take them all at once and just leave her with 2 chicks, and she raises them to adulthood. And then when she stops hanging around with them, they come out of the pen. So that makes it a little easier on her. Again, the meat is a bit tougher and a bit darker, and I do the same thing with them that I do with the older chickens. If I want if I want a roaster turkey, I will take a young bird, so 6 to 8 months. And that will be what's done down and put in the freezer. It has to be cooked a little slower, but it is a much richer taste. The old birds do end up in jars on my shelf. So, yeah. They're amazing foragers. So if you have a really weedy patch of ground and you can't keep it under control because there's too many rocks, you can't cut it with a lawnmower, fence it in and put your turkeys in there. They will strip it. And they love foraging. They strip the weeds. They encourage grass growth because, of course, they leave some fertilizer. But they'll even keep the grass clipped. So the pond area, I would say, is probably these two sections of seats. And I don't cut that grass at all because the turkeys and the ducks keep it about that long. It's quite lovely in there. And I don't have to do any maintenance. Don't put chickens and turkeys together because chickens will pass on a virus to turkeys. The chickens don't have a problem with that virus, but the turkeys, it can kill them. So I judge my turkeys to be ready. I don't have a specific date because heritage birds don't follow the rules. So they don't all grow uniformly. So I'll pick a turkey up. And I know that I've got to cut that weight in half because when you clean that bird, you're removing internal organs and feathers. So you cut your weight in half. I weigh that bird, and whatever half that weight is, I know that roughly that's how much meat I'm going to have. And if that bird's ready to go, then that bird goes. So the hens will lay up to 20 eggs depending on the year. Typically, they will only lay once a year, but I have had the odd hen do a winter hatching. So if she didn't nest in the spring well, and she only hatched 1 or 2 chicks, she'll try it again in the fall. I don't know how they turn the switch on to say lay eggs in the fall, but some of them do it. So one year I had a hen hatch out 18 of her 20 eggs, and she kept them all safe. It was pretty impressive. So for my pens, I have 2 by 4 inch steel gauge wire fencing that's, I think it's 16 gauge. So that's a heavy, heavy fence. As I said, we have a problem with predators, and we're going into the raccoon thing now. I have an electric fence wire that goes around the top of the fence. There is nothing more hilarious than in the middle of the night waking up to hearing a raccoon scream because they've hit the electric fence trying to climb into the pen. I have not lost a bird to raccoons in over 5 years. And I have several pens. They all have electric fence around the top. They all have the wire folded out and rocks placed on them on the bottom. So with the turkeys, I've got the heavier gauge wire. I then put hardware wire around the bottom because turkey chicks aren't any smarter than chicken chicks, and they will run through the wire, and the cat has enough sense to sit there and wait for them. So then she will pick off the chicks one by one as they come through. So the hardware wire, it's only up about 2 feet, just enough to keep those chicks in. So then at the end of my garden year, most people go around their vegetable garden and they pull out all the debris. I let my turkeys go through first because they will strip a lot of that and eat it. And they do dig, and they dig with ferocity. So I get a bit of a rototiller effect in the garden. They will clean out rotting vegetation, and they love it. So when they're done, I then put my heritage chickens in there, and they'll go after all the parasites. They'll go after the weed seeds that the turkeys left behind. So come spring, I have a very fertile, pretty low weed ratio in my garden. So I love the heritage birds for that reason. Okay, so then I go on to heritage ducks. Now, my daughter has khaki Campbell. This is a Muscovy duck. That's what I have. My daughter has khaki Campbell. They do lay up to about 200 eggs a year. So she uses their eggs for baking. She doesn't use those ducks for meat. I use these for meat. They are monstrous, especially the drakes. Pound for pound, they're probably equivalent to a male turkey, the male Muscovy ducks. I chose the Muscovies for a couple of reasons. They're a quieter duck. So at 4 in the morning when you hear wah, 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 it's not fun. Your neighbors don't like you when that happens. These hiss, which kind of, some people really find that a little creepy. So they hiss, they don't quack. They're a whole lot quieter. I very rarely hear them. They are a meatier bird. They eat far less than the chickens and the turkeys combined. So for your dollar, they are probably the most cost effective as a meat bird. They love the pond area, but they don't have to be raised in a pond area. I wouldn't recommend a kiddie pool. I would recommend one of those waterers that has the nipples on them, that they have to move it to get water. Otherwise, your pen will be mud, just quagmire. They are an aquatic bird, but they can survive quite well outside of that terrain. Now, they get their wings clipped too, because they also are a fully flighted bird. So in the spring, before I get their flight feathers clipped, sometimes they will take off and they will circle the property and they never land back in their pen. So then I have the fun job of opening all the pen doors and hoping that they will go back in and into the shelter at night, which is why I always feed them in the shelter. So they, at some point, have to go in there if they want food, and then I close the door, and then we do the clipping session. The nice thing I like about heritage birds, especially the heritage chickens, they learn to duck. So we have eagles' nests around us. There are a lot of eagles and a lot of hawks. And they will swoop down and pluck a bird right out of the field. The heritage birds only need to see that once, and then they figure out that death is falling from the sky, and they run. So I don't lose, I maybe lose one young bird a year, and then they learn. So they are a little smarter because the gene pool is a little more diverse. So feeding. We feed non-GMO organic feed that we buy again from another farmer that grows all his own and sells it. But we soak our feed. So I've got 5-gallon buckets with lids, and I will put half the bucket full of feed and then cover it with water and put the lid on, and that sits until I've used it. Now that sounds very dangerous, that it's going to ferment, it's going to cause mold. They love it. I don't know if they get drunk on the fermentation, not sure, but they love it. But here's the nice thing, they eat half as much because the grains swell. So they're already partly digested, and when they eat that stuff, it's like candy to them, but they eat half as much. I learned that from my daughter, which tells you can teach an old dog new tricks. She taught me that, and she taught me also that birds tend to have a lower selenium intake in North America because we have a deficiency in our soil. they need selenium. Sunflower seed is the best source for poultry, so I throw a handful in their pen at night, and they just love rooting around for that. So I do 3 of those 5-gallon pails. I have probably 30 chickens, and then the 5 turkeys, and then 3 ducks in the winter. So those 3 pails will last me for about 4 days for the whole flock. That's how efficient it is. You get used to figuring out what the water feed ratio is, because if you're trying to get it out of the bucket and it's like digging cement, you don't have enough water in there. So check, the night before you're going to use that bucket to see if you can actually get the feed out. If you don't, add a bit more water, it'll soften it, and then you can get at the feed, no problem. We've had buckets go for a week, and you open them up and it's like a whiskey distillery in there. They love it. Because the heritage birds are hardier, they are less prone to disease, they are less prone to digestive problems. So our birds eat the kitchen scraps. No, we don't have a composter either. And they do eat the meat scraps. Now, with the chicken, I make sure it's cooked. So I will not feed them raw chicken. But if I've cut meat off of a beef bone, they get the raw bone, because they need the meat, they need the nutrient in that raw meat. They are omnivores, so they need raw meat. I just make sure it's not poultry that's raw. And they will pick a bone clean. They will even sometimes eat some of the smaller bones, and that works in their crop. So they get all of our eggshells. I don't crush mine into fine powder. I just make sure that they don't look like a whole egg. So they do get mashed a bit. I've been told that you're not supposed to feed eggshells to chickens because then they start eating the eggs. But I have found that if chickens are eating eggs, it's because they're low in calcium and protein. So when I have the odd hen that starts pecking at the actual eggs, I go to my daughter and I ask her to start saving me her eggshells, and I inundate them with eggshells. That hen will eat shells until she's sick of eating shells, and then she leaves the eggs alone. So you have to ask yourself, why are they doing this? Is this a nutritional problem? Is this a parasite problem? Is this an illness problem? Everything they do usually has a reason behind it. So they love the garden snails with the shells. I've even trained my turkeys to eat the garden snails, shells and all. So the chickens will pick them apart and smash them down because they're so big. The turkeys, they eat them whole. It's kind of funny to watch. And if the turkeys leave anything behind, the ducks will come along and finish them up. Be ready, though. Ducks will eat frogs whole, and it's a little disconcerting seeing their neck jumping. They do that. So I think my last picture, one more. So that's a harlequin. So does anybody notice anything unusual about this Ridley bronze hen? Anybody? Yeah, so she's got ducklings. But over on her right here, there's one turkey chick. So what happened with this hen, she was not content to just have 1 or 2 of her own eggs. She was in the same pen with the ducks, and at the time I had runner ducks. So the eggs are a little smaller than Muscovies. She would wait until the duck laid her eggs in her nest and got up to go and eat, and she would go to the nest and pick the eggs up in her beak and run. It was the funniest thing. Every morning we watched it. It was like watching horses at the racetrack. She would start running, and the drake would be running behind her, snapping at her tail. And she'd do about 2 laps of the garden pond, and then he'd give up. And then she'd just very carefully meander over to the little corner where she had her turkey eggs, and she would set the duck eggs. So she hatched out 7 ducklings and her 2 turkeys, and she knew they were ducklings, and she would take them down to the edge of the pond, and the ducklings would go for a swim while the little turkey chicks stayed with her. And then when the ducks came too close to the ducklings, she'd let out a squawk, and the ducklings would all come over to her and hunker down underneath her. Heritage poultry is known for doing this kind of thing. Their reproduction instinct is so incredibly strong that, like Jaden said, you can pile eggs under that hen. Well, you can do the same thing with Muscovy eggs with a turkey hen. Muscovies are 32-day hatch date. So turkeys are 28. It's close enough. Chickens are 21. That's too far for a chicken hen usually to want to stay on a Muscovy egg. They'll stay on a turkey egg because that's only another week. But then beyond that, they're really not interested. So when I'm setting eggs under birds, I make sure that I set the turkey eggs under a week before I set the chicken eggs under. And I'll set Muscovy eggs under the turkey hens at the same time they're laying their eggs. As soon as I see 1 or 2 eggs in a nest for the turkeys, I'll make sure the Muscovy eggs go in there first. And then she'll keep laying eggs, and then she'll sit, and those eggs, she hatches them. So that was, one of our lovely turkey hens. So I give them the eggshells. I make sure they have lots of foraging area. In the winter, so how many of you have wood stoves? How many of you have chickens and wood stoves? So you guys have an actual benefit, because you can take the ashes from your wood stove and you leave them overnight to make sure the coals die down, because we don't need barns burning down. Not good. And you take that and you spread that over their bedding. It cuts down on the ammonia smell. They will dust bath in that, and that will kill the mites that they have. Because they're walking through it, it also kills the leg mites. They will ingest little pieces of charcoal, and that will kill coccidiosis. It'll kill tapeworm, which chickens can get. So we do that about every 2 weeks, all through the winter. And then when it starts to look a little murky in that stall, then we'll add bedding, because we know that it's already done its job. But it's hilarious seeing them dust bath in a pile of ashes. When we do watering for our poultry, and we do this right from day one, I'll put a teaspoon of cider vinegar, a drop of oil of oregano, and a drop of iodine in the water containers. Now, I'll do that in the big containers. I do it in a bucket for the chicks so that I make sure that I'm not condensing that dose in a little tiny watering thing. So they get that prevents coccidiosis from even taking hold, because that parasite does not like that environment. As far as feed goes for the chicks, everything gets layer, because that's what we buy from this farmer. And because it's wet, we give the chicks about that much, day-old chicks, and they love it. They thrive on that, even though it's laying mash. Nothing is too big and too hard for them to eat because it's been soaked. So it's soft, and they go through that like it's candy. I think I've covered everything. Any questions? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the question was, I dispense my feed daily. Yes, I do. when I go away, I'll put the dry feed down in the big feeders. But I mean, my life is on my property, and I have no social life, which is okay. I'm good with that. I'm the crazy chicken lady. I like that. So yes, I dispense the feed in the morning, and just a yogurt cup, and I've got so many cups that each pen gets, and it works really, really well. And I see a question coming.
Could you just go over the water ratio again of apple cider, iodine, and was it oregano oil?
Oil of oregano, yeah. Oh, and I also, so I'll back up, yes. So in a 5-gallon bucket or a 5-gallon waterer, when I fill that up, I'll put 1 drop of oil of oregano, 1 drop of iodine, and a teaspoon of cider vinegar. And they don't taste it, they don't notice it, but it just changes their body just enough that those parasites don't like it. So,
Kind of question with the wood ash and their bedding. Like, you're just liberal. You just kind of.
I take my bucket full of wood ash and I go right like that in the middle of the pen. They spread it everywhere. Okay. But they'll go, soon as I dump that in, they're right on it and they're rolling in it and they're having a great old time. And then I'll see 1 or 2 hens will grab a piece of charcoal, run off to the corner, and then start eating it. So I know that those hens, okay, so there's an inclination there might be a parasite problem with her. So she's eating her charcoal, and I'll notice the next time I bring the bucket in, she's probably not interested. So it's done its job.
Every 2 weeks, you just dump it.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just make sure the coals are not live. Couple days maybe waiting is good.
So if we had a little setup and wanted to go away for a weekend, what would you do? That's question number 1, and question number 2 is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the bylaws in Malahide Lions.
Oh,
Just
no.
curious.
No, I don't know about the bylaws. So we do go away quite regularly. We're blessed. We have 2 daughters at home that will come and check on our stuff, and one of them is a homesteader, and so she knows all the ailments and what to deal with. Typically what I will do is I will set up one of the great big poultry feeders, fill it with dry feed, and yes, it's going to cost me twice as much because I'm not soaking the feed, but I'm going away, so I don't care. I've got a 7-gallon waterer and I've got a 5-gallon waterer. For the bigger flock, I'll put that in there. If they're all adult birds, I'll also put a couple of buckets of water that are treated. So my daughter, all she has to do is step into the pen, and if she sees that the water is getting low, she just knows she's got to load up those buckets. And usually that's close to the end of 2 weeks. So that will take my 30 birds through 2 weeks of winter. The turkeys, because they're an outside bird, I do have a pond heater in a little section of the pond, so the water is low maintenance. All they have to do is check to make sure the electricity's going to it. But even then, we've had the power go out and the pond froze over and they just ate snow. So they're so low maintenance, the turkeys and the ducks. Again, they get a big feeder. That'll last them a month. So when I come home, I don't even have to care about what they're looking like because I know they're still going to have way more feed than I need to deal with. So it is doable. I would say the recommendation is make sure you have someone who knows what to look for, even if they don't have to do a whole lot of chores. Just have someone who, okay, so you have 5 birds that are dead now. What do I do? If they know that, okay, there's wood ash in there and there's There's this stuff in the water. They've got a list, but they don't need it until it's further down the list. I don't have a whole lot of problem with getting the girls to look after the animals because I make it as easy as possible. Also, with the heat lamps, I've used a 45-watt bulb to do the same thing as a heat lamp. So if you really don't want that intense heat, I've used it in a brooder situation. And the heritage chicks are so hardy. So last winter, a year ago, I had chicks that I had hatched out, and it was the coldest day of the winter, and the power went out. And I didn't know it because it was 11 o'clock at night. I found out it was 11 o'clock when the power went out because my light timer was flashing 11 o'clock. So I knew that's when it went out. It was out until 8 the next morning, and I had a whole brooder full of chicks with no heat in a cold barn. They were all hunkered down in the corner on top of one another. As soon as the power came back on, they all scrambled back under the light. So they're far, far hardier. Anyway, that's heritage birds. Anybody else? Christy? And what's that? So there's a mic here. Yes.
Is it on? There we go. All right. Thank you, Donna. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
That was a lot of information. So you got to stay up here, though.
Oh, yeah.
So I really want to honor your guys' time. So I know it's 12:15 and you guys are probably hungry. But I wanted to give you guys a chance. If anybody else has any more questions for myself, Donna, or Jaden, now that you've had time to think about it, definitely feel free to come up and ask. I was going to add to Donna's, my favorite thing to do with extra duck eggs is gluten-free baking.
Ah, yeah.
If you're gluten-free, it makes it so much better. I don't know.
Yep.
It's richer.
They are. They're way richer.
So, and then I had somebody ask me out in the other room about dual-purpose birds.
Okay.
And I know we had kind of talked about it, but I just want to make sure everybody knew. Like a dual-purpose bird, a lot of times you'll keep the hens and use them for eggs, and then you'll eat the roosters.
Yes.
Depending on what type of, if they're heritage,
Yeah.
like 6 months, and if they're more, what would you call it?
Commercial.
A more commercial bird, you
Yes.
can eat them sooner. And I know we can always do another training later about how to sex the chicks,
Yeah.
because I feel like
I think that's pretty cool.
yeah, there's different ways to tell whether they're roosters or hens, which is a handy dandy thing to know if you're growing them out and you're like, oh, I ordered 50 birds and 30 or 40 of them are roosters over
Yeah.
layers. So, which happens, by the way.
Yep.
So we can always do another training on kind of how to do that. That's kind of a 201 training. So did anybody have anything else that they wanted to ask? If you do, come up to the mic so we can get it recorded. Yeah, Jaden, you can come up too if you want.
So if I wanted to get started with the heritage chickens, where would I start? Where would I get them?
That's what I forgot. Okay, so in here I do have, and I think it is in your packet, is it? Yeah, in the back of the, yeah. So I listed, I typically get mine under Kijiji, and there was one point I was going to make. So if you're buying poultry from feed stores, et cetera, they issue you a registration number. That registration number is a government number. So if you don't want that, I buy off Kijiji. Or I buy directly from breeders who are known to breed heritage poultry.
Or buy from Donna.
Or me. Well, actually, yeah. So DC Heritage Poultry is out of Quebec. That's where I do get a lot of my hatching eggs, and they ship them in the mail. They're very well wrapped, so they don't come looking scrambled, which is really good. They don't incubate well when they're scrambled. There's a couple of different ones listed here that I have had secondhand information. I haven't actually used them. One of them I put in there, and I think it's the grade A farms, are the ones that have the $1,800 chickens listed there because they're rare. I just thought that would be humorous for you to see and go, so Kijiji is a big one. There are a lot of heritage breeders around. I just punch into the search engine heritage chickens, heritage turkeys, heritage ducks, and it'll show you in your region. What else was I gonna say? I don't remember. It was a brainstorm.
Wants to say something because he grabbed an incubator.
I got a couple questions asked me after that I should have included. Some of them about the incubator. Someone asked if I could just put the eggs in here and just tilt the table. I don't recommend that because you want the eggs to be secure where they're standing, because if you tilt it, they're all going to roll and they could get damaged
scramble.
and all that. Yeah, it's not that great for them. You either want to turn them by hand, which someone asked about that too. When you turn them by hand, you lay them on their side, you put an X on the one side, and you flip it completely over. When you put them in the turner, you want the pointy end down so that the air bubble is up. Some eggs, like duck eggs, you can't really tell which end is the pointy end. So you hold it up, you candle it, whichever end has the light air bubble, that points up. Can't really stand them on the point on here, so you just put them on their side, but that was one of the things. And then, what else was there?
I know, so many questions and not enough brain
Don't
power
remember
for
what
me.
the other questions were. Yes, yes. Someone asked how I keep the humidity up. Now there's a reason for this mesh here. It's because you put water in the bottom. Now there's little holes in the bottom. You don't want to put the water where the holes are. I've done that. It makes your carpet wet. This is where you put the water. There's different designs and different places where you put the water in all the incubators, but that's what it is for this one. Sometimes your incubators don't let you fill up your turners all the way because of the heating element and where it is. Sometimes this hangs too low in the incubator and you can't put them in the middle here. I use those empty slots for temperature and humidity. I use those ones because they fit nicely in the turner. That's the one thing I don't like about this one, is that sometimes the eggs, can't put them in the middle.
Taking your turner out 3 days before.
Yes. Now when I say stop turning your eggs, that means if they're in a turner, take it out. There's a couple of reasons for that. You want them to not be disturbed for those 3 days so they can get settled and hatch. Also, there's been a couple times where they have hatched in these, they can get stuck. Some of them underneath of it, some of them their legs, it might be harder for them to get out of the shell. If it's in the turner, it's just an obstacle that doesn't need to be there. And then, yeah. Oh, a thing about keeping turkeys with chicks. You definitely don't put your turkey chicks with your chicken chicks.
Nope.
They'll die.
Yep.
They will die. I think it's called blackhead, the disease
Yes.
it is. It can be in the soil.
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't have that problem with any other chicks. I'll keep ducklings and chicks together. Again, the water is a problem with that, but you can get around that. Guineas and chickens, highly suggest it. Guinea chicks are much smaller than chicken chicks, but if you raise your chicken chicks with your guineas, those guineas won't pick on as much, those chickens specifically. Any other chickens, they will pick on them. Raising your guinea chicks with your chicken chicks will make those guineas a bit smarter because they'll learn from the chickens and stick near them. They might even lay their eggs with the chicken chicks. So I love raising my guineas either by hen or with chicken chicks. And that's pretty much. They love ticks. Oh, the utility of raising guineas. They love ticks and mites and mosquitoes. They will eat so many.
Yeah.
They are incredibly loud. So dumb God gave them a helmet. Literally, they have a helmet on their head.
True.
Really hard to keep alive. They're expensive. You sell them, you can get like 100 something per bird, $9 per chick. The eggs are expensive. They're very, people like eating them. They're good for eating. Another thing is their eggs are hard to find. They love hiding their nests. They're much more feral than chickens.
Yeah.
Hard to get them to roost too.
Something to piggyback off of that. If you're buying commercial chickens or commercial turkeys, so I'm pretty sure they've bred the brain out of commercial turkeys. Because, as you said, you got to dip their beak in the water, or you got to put a dime in the water because they'll peck at shiny things. But I found the most, back years ago when I was raising commercial birds, I would take one of my layer hen chicks and put it in with the turkey chicks. And because at the time we were feeding the turkey chicks medicated feed because they're so fragile. So I wasn't worried about the passing on of disease. So this chicken chick automatically has the instinct to eat and drink and all that wonderful stuff. If one bird in that group starts eating and drinking, all the others will join it. So where it was funny was when I had a laying hen that was obese because she was eating the turkey feed and she was a full-grown hen and half the size of the turkeys, and they would follow her everywhere. It was kind of funny. But that's a good way to keep your turkey flock alive till it's ready to not be alive. Yeah. Oh, and medicated feed. If you do buy commercial feed, check and make sure that it is either not medicated, or if it is, that you're not feeding it to ducks, because it will kill them. Ducks do not do well with medicated feeds of any kind. So they're a different species entirely. You cannot breed Muscovy ducks with any other of the standard ducks. They are a different species of duck and do not mix. It's kind of like a donkey and a horse. You end up with a mule that is sterile. Well, that's the equivalent. So they're sterile.
We have a pretty well-established pond in our backyard. It's man-made. We do have some fish in there. We're thinking about ducks. Is that a problem?
Nope, that's what mine is. So when we moved to our property, we didn't know there was a pond there because it was so overgrown with weeds, and there was this much pond scum on the top of the water. So we worked our way through the weeds to kind of go, hey, I wonder what's here. And there was a pond. We didn't have time to rebuild the barn, so I put a fence around the pond, just deer netting real quick, threw all my poultry in there, chickens, ducks, turkeys, figured I'll put a little bit of water in every day, a little bit of feed, because we got to unpack. 2 weeks later, we finally paid attention, and I discovered that the ducks had eaten a third of the pond scum. The turkeys had knocked all the 6-foot-tall foliage over and stripped the stems, and the chickens had rooted them up to get at the bugs. So over the course of 2 weeks, they had half of that area cleaned, and they've been in there ever since. And there were goldfish in there.
And they
now,
don't bother them?
Muscovy ducks won't bother them. The runner ducks, they were the ones that would eat just about anything that moved, and that's where the frogs were jumping around in their throat. And
You said that the Muscovy ducks,
they
camp out there? Like they don't,
Yeah,
they
they'll
don't
camp.
come into the...
they
back
don't
into
really
the-
go into the shelter unless there's food in there. That's about the only time they'll go in. Occasionally, one of the hens will go in and start laying eggs, and so I leave her in there and just kind of put a blind up so that the other birds leave her alone. But
Give it a try.
yeah,
The only thing you have to worry about in a pond pretty much ever is snapping turtles.
yeah,
So as long as you know you don't have a snapping turtle, because they'll pull a duck under.
yep,
So,
yep.
sounds
But they
familiar.
taste good, apparently. Yeah.
I trust you.
My daughter and son-in-law, yeah.
You had
Oh,
another
you
question?
cook it right. It's all about the cooking.
So we have a swimming pool, and we're concerned about getting Muscovy ducks because we don't want them in the pool.
That's
Is it above
valid.
ground or in ground?
It's above ground.
Oh, they won't go in as long as you keep their flight feathers clipped. But if you're doing poultry like ducks or geese, you're gonna want to pen them because they make your back steps really slick. Because they figure out very fast that that's where the food originates, and they will decorate your steps a lot. So
100%.
the word grease comes to mind. Yeah, so you want them in a pan.
And how would we integrate a new Muscovy duck? I imagine we'd have to get chicks.
Not necessarily. If you want to integrate any bird into a new flock, do it at night. So get your poultry, whatever poultry it is you're going to get, wait until about 11 o'clock at night and put it in the pen. Make sure the pen is very dark. Put that bird in with whatever other birds you're putting it in with right next to them because they're in a coma. They don't care. By morning, that bird smells like the rest of the other birds. So it's adapted into that flock very quickly. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to make sure we honor your time. So if you do have any more questions, definitely feel free to catch us. I just really quick wanted to close in prayer and just bless everyone as they go home. So Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the time that we've had together to learn together and learn from each other. We just pray that you be with everyone on their way home and help them to have a great weekend. Bring us all back here safely tomorrow and bless all of our homesteading ventures. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.